Is Sonic Advance still good? Sonic Advance was the very first Sonic game ever released on a Nintendo platform, though not Sega's first Sonic game released on a non-Sega platform, with that distinction going to Sonic Jam for the Gamecom and Sonic Pocket Adventure for the Neo Geo Pocket Color. Anyway, with Sega transitioning as a third-party developer, Sonic fans were eager to see Sonic's return to the second dimension, and Nintendo fans were eager to have Sega's flagship mascot finally grace their handheld. And you know what? The game was a smashing success, selling over 1 million units worldwide, in addition to receiving positive reviews. G4TV gave the game a 4 out of 5, stating, "Simply experiencing the old Sonic gameplay again after so many years of 3D titles makes the title a must-have for longtime Sonic fans." GamePro magazine scored the game an 8 out of 10, noting, "A simple, tried-and-true blast from the past, faithfully recapturing the Hog's legacy, and reining in just enough characters and elements from the new to satisfy anyone craving more from their marsupials than just moving to the right at really high speeds." Finally, GameSpy gave the game an 8.8 out of 10, proclaiming, "Everything that a side-scrolling platform-loving fan could ask for. It's got all the great tried-and-true fast-paced Sonic action of the old Genesis series, looks fine, plays excellently, and offers some fun multiplayer action." So, is Sonic Advance still this good? Let's take a look. The game's opening cutscene basically outlines the entire plot. Here is Eggman. Go defeat him. Per usual, things open up in a bright, sunny green area, in this case, Neo Green Hill Zone. The first thing you'll notice is Sonic himself has been completely overhauled, matching the art direction introduced in Sonic Adventure. Still, the slimmed-down hedgehog with green eyes and lengthy limbs looks great. The next thing you'll notice is the controls are spot on, matching the responsive and predictable mechanics from the original Genesis games. Running, jumping, and spin dashing all feel perfect. Also like normal, the first stage represents the least amount of challenge, being relatively easy to breeze through with few tricky jumps, a very linear path to the finish, and plenty of rings to keep you from dying. After clearing 2 acts of Neo Green Hill, we arrive at Secret Base. If you're noticing a trend here, you'd be right. Sonic Team and Dimps seem to stick very closely to the formula laid out in the Genesis titles, including set pieces and to a lesser extent the order of the set pieces. Anyway, much like Chemical Plant or Flying Battery, Secret Base has an industrialized theme. Here, the level design is really blown wide open as well, with a ton of different paths through the level and a ton of vertical elements. There are also some transparency effects, which is something the Genesis couldn't do, at least to this extent. After clearing these 2 acts, we arrive at Casino Paradise. It is here in Sonic Advance where we really start to see the fan service laid on thick. Past elements of casino-themed levels are all mashed together, creating a pair of acts that are extremely fun, with plenty of flippers, bumpers, and other gimmicks which are a real treat to race through. Ice Mountain is next. Here, Sonic Advance finally introduces one of my least favorite Sonic gimmicks, water. While traveling underwater, the game slows down considerably with a reduced pace and clumsy jumping physics. And of course, you'll have to keep searching out air bubbles to keep poor Sonic from drowning. If I'm honest, while I'm not crazy about these water levels, they are some of the least offensive I've experienced in the series. In fact, even on my first playthrough, I never drowned once. Air bubbles are spaced out decent enough, and the acts contain a much better ratio of below water and above water sections, keeping these from feeling tedious. From here, we travel to Angel Island, representing the Ancient Ruins section of Sonic Advance. As we are about halfway through the game, one should notice the progressing difficulty curve. Being co-developed by Dimps, who had a fascination with bottomless pits, the acts of Angel Island require you to slow down at times and properly time your jumps, otherwise you'll be falling to your death. Spikes are also placed in somewhat obnoxious places, making it more difficult to accrue the 100 rings necessary for racking up extra lives. There is definitely some trial and error involved here, again, similar to the classic trilogy. In addition to being very platform-focused, the level design contains plenty of vertical elements in addition to working its way back and forth, making the acts feel rather large and sprawling. Still, Sonic Team did a nice job not going overboard, and these complicated levels don't take an extraordinary time to complete, staying below what I feel is a reasonable 5-minute time frame. After clearing the ancient ruins, Sonic Advance takes a departure from the standard structure. First, we have Egg Rocket. Here, the timer actually works backwards, forcing you to get a move on. As the title suggests, you are entering Eggman's rocket, which is headed for the moon. As rockets have various stages, Sonic has to make his way up the rocket before these sections detach. There are 3 stages in all. After clearing the first and second, you'll see the previous stage break off before the next one begins. It's a cool little touch, and I appreciate Sonic Team changing up the structure. Finally, we arrive at Cosmic Angel. This represents the classic act before the final boss stage. This is also the most challenging level in the entire game. Badniks work against the flow of the level, making it easy to get hit with projectiles. Spikes are inconveniently placed in areas to make sure poor Sonic is constantly losing rings, and there are some anti-gravity sections. I can't say I'm a fan of this level, but it does the job it needs to do. It provides a nice challenge, a bit cheap, leading up to the final boss, but I'll get to that boss in a bit. In addition to playing the game as the Blue Blur, Sonic Advance offers 3 additional characters to select as well. Staples like Tails and Knuckles are here, and their playstyles are what you would expect. Tails has his trademark ability to fly, can swim underwater, and has a tail attack in addition to the normal jump attack. However, what I'm most impressed with is how the flying is not all that game-breaking. Levels are tight enough where Tails can't really cheat his way through, keeping him honest with obstacles. Still, there is no doubt about it, playing with Tails does reduce the difficulty level. And while he can't zip across the entire stage, there are plenty of sections that can be bypassed entirely, along with alternate routes not accessible to Sonic. Better still, many of the boss fights are much easier. Generally speaking, the boss fights in the classic Sonic games just aren't my cup of tea. Oftentimes they feel sloppy, and a brute force approach, sacrificing damage knowing you can snatch a ring and keep on going, is the most effective strategy. Things don't really change here in Sonic Advance. However, a few times I was able to find some clever solutions to make these go faster. On the Mecha Knuckles boss, for example, you can camp out on the edge of the screen and Knuckles will float right into you. With Tails, things become much more manageable, as you can simply fly out of the way to react to firing patterns, or use Tails' ability to swim and fly to bypass the ice chunks you are supposed to jump on. Combine the flying with the easier boss fights and it's easy to zip through the game without many problems. The third character is Knuckles. Knuckles has his trademark gliding and climbing, making it easier to find secrets and shortcuts, similar to Tails. He also has a punching attack, but if I'm honest, I never really use this. Additionally, Knuckles can float on water, but this is really only useful on the water boss. And much like Tails, a few of the bosses are made a touch easier thanks to his gliding ability. Finally, we arrive at the 4th playable character, Amy Rose. I actually kinda like the addition of the 4th character, as it carries on this side-scrolling series tradition of adding just a single new character with each installment. And let me tell you, Amy Rose plays completely different than the other 3 characters. For one, she has no spin dash, can't roll into a ball, and is pretty much vulnerable to attack at nearly all times. At first, I thought this would be a pretty frustrating handicap, but honestly, it really changes up the gameplay, offers a much higher challenge, and it forces you to play the entire adventure more like a traditional platformer, rather than blaze away like a normal Sonic game. To deal with these handicaps, Amy is armed with her Pico Pico hammer. Swinging this will take out enemies, and pressing the attack a second time will inch her forward, swinging again in case you missed. Amy also has a pair of air attacks. Pressing the attack button in the air will perform a mid-air spin. Sadly, you can only do this attack once per jump, so attack wisely. Finally, you can press down in attack to have Amy crash to the ground, destroying everything in her path. With the lack of a spin dash, Amy is also equipped with additional moves to assure she can get through the levels without getting stuck. First is a hammer jump, which allows her to reach higher platforms than normal, and second is a quick step, allowing her to build up momentum quickly. Again, this is the toughest playthrough of the 4 characters. Unless you have every enemy memorized, you're going to have some mid-air collisions, and because you're losing rings a lot, it will be tougher to build up a stock of lives. Still, a few of the boss battles do again change. Here, it is best to stay at the bottom of the level and swing your hammer, rather than staying on the center platform relying on jumps. And the water boss is a piece of cake. Amy's attack radius is quite large, meaning she can bypass the ice and reach Eggman right from the ground, and with her hammer jump she can reach the air to prevent herself from drowning. As a whole, Amy's adventure isn't perfect, but works a whole lot better than I thought it would, and the increased challenge was a nice way to end my 4-character marathon run of the game. Being a Sonic title, there are of course 7 Chaos Emeralds, and these are all obtained through special stages. The special stages can be accessed by these giant springs near the tops of levels. These are limited, however, and can be quite tough to find, requiring you to really go out of your way and explore alternate paths. The special stages themselves are just okay. You are free falling down a pipe and have to snatch the prerequisite number of rings to obtain the Chaos Emerald. You can also collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds with any combination of characters, increasing your odds of obtaining all 7. This of course brings us to the final boss. Here, Eggman has 3 distinct forms, and the first 2 should be familiar to longtime fans. The first is ripped straight from Sonic 1, and the second from Sonic 2. Even cooler, the appropriate music has been recreated for the Game Boy Advance, and this is an awesome throwback to the original titles. The third form, however, is a real pain in the ass. Basically, Eggman has 4 different attacks, and all 4 of them can be extremely tough to avoid. The laser can be leaped over or ducked under, the mechanical hand is actually easy to avoid, but you'll lose all your rings if you don't. These bomb things are nearly impossible to avoid while getting in a hit, and finally, you'll zip across the level. Your best bet is to just take the damage and hope to snatch a ring to keep the fight going. To be fair though, I did beat him on my first try with both Knuckles and Amy, so it isn't terrible, but still flawed nonetheless. Now, if you manage to collect all 7 Chaos Emeralds and beat the game with all 4 characters, there is another final boss with you piloting Super Sonic. Now, I did beat the game with Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy, but I didn't collect the necessary emeralds to fight this last battle, and received the good ending. Instead, I watched each character take down Eggman and fall back down to Earth, only to be rescued by the tornado and received the bad ending. And then of course, the credits roll. Moving on, I have to talk about the graphics. Despite the lower resolution of the Game Boy Advance, I found everything to be quite beautiful and a real step above the Genesis trilogy in terms of color usage and spray detail. However, while the environments are lovely, the characters are really over the top. The sheer amount of animation here is astounding. Every action is wonderfully detailed and really takes advantage of the additional ROM space and RAM offered by the hardware. Better still, hardware rotation effects are used when going through a loop or even walking up a slope, adding a layer of detail just not possible on the 4th generation consoles. It really is a terrific looking game, and it's clear the developers went all out to make sure Sonic's return to 2D was truly something special. But even more special is the soundtrack. If the GBA has one weak point, it's the sound hardware. However, the composers managed to make do with what they had to create some memorable tracks. Days after playing, I could still recall and hum many of them, a hallmark of great chiptunes. Better still, the tracks are altered and changed with each act rather than repeating, which is another nice touch giving Sonic Advance a high level of polish. Before wrapping up, let me mention a few features I didn't get to try. I'm not much of a Chow fan, so I didn't bother playing with Tiny Chow Garden. You can also link this up to the GameCube if you have the appropriate cable in Sonic Adventure DX or Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. Finally, there are some multiplayer modes if you have a link cable and 4 Game Boy Advances lying around, which I don't. So, with all of that out of the way, we arrive back to the question asked at the beginning of the video: is Sonic Advance still good? The answer to this question depends on whether or not you like the classic 2D Sonic games. If you get easily frustrated or annoyed by trial-and-error gameplay, questionable enemy placement, hard-to-avoid spikes, and sloppy boss battles, then Sonic Advance might not be for you. It really doesn't change the core mechanics of the classic Sonic games at all. However, if you're like me and gameplay quibbles like this don't bother you, well, you're in for a treat. For me, Sonic Advance is simply amazing. The tight jumping controls, awesome mix of mindless speed and fun platforming, vast array of level gimmicks, a diverse collection of set pieces, and one of the best soundtracks available on the hardware make for an irresistible experience. Something about Sonic Advance is just insanely fun for me. The level design is quite excellent, and despite them moving in every direction, I never found myself lost. These flow really well, making forward progress logical while also offering plenty of nooks and crannies containing power-ups, extra lives, and bonus stages, encouraging exploration. There are also plenty of little arrows scattered about, always showing you the way forward whenever the level designers thought something might be a touch on the confusing side. I love stuff like this, and I was never confused or scratching my head trying to determine which way is in fact forward. And while the game isn't quite perfect, frustrating moments are just few and far between, and often easy to avoid altogether with repeat playthroughs. And because there are 4 characters with unique movesets to play as, you'll want to play through multiple times. And if you're an old jaded gamer like me, you'll no doubt appreciate all the little subtle nods to games of Sonic's past. Whether this is simply a flipper acting exactly the same way as you remember, or the music that plays when you grab the invincibility power-up, it's clear Sonic Team and Dimps cared about the game they created. Sonic Advance feels like it was made with a lot of passion and love, and well, what more could a gamer ask for?